Imagine Leilani, a successful graphic designer, standing at her oceanfront altar in a hibiscus bloom, about to marry her dream man, only for his other wife and 3 kids to crash the ceremony, exposing years of lies and stolen inheritance. What revenge did she unleash? You have to hear this.
Thanks for having me, Eliza. Sharing this still stings, but it's fueled my fire to help others spot red flags and fight back, just like I did when everything fell apart. My name is Leilani, and I thought I had found my forever. At 35, I had built everything I dreamed of since I was a little girl sitting on my grandmother's lap, listening to her stories about love, family, and the sacred bonds of Aga. My graphic design firm was thriving. My long, wavy black hair caught the California sun just right, and I had Mark, successful, charming, devoted Mark, who claimed to love everything about my Samoan heritage and promised to honor it in our life together. The morning of what should have been the happiest day of my life, I stood in the bridal suite of the oceanfront resort, adjusting the single white hibiscus flower in my hair. It was a tradition my grandmother had taught me, one flower, worn loose and natural, to represent the pure love between husband and wife. My dark brown eyes reflected back at me from the mirror, and for a moment, I saw her in my face, her wisdom, her strength. "You look perfect, sweetheart," my mother said, tears glistening as she fastened the pearl necklace that had been in our family for generations. Grandmother would be so proud. I smiled, but something cold settled in my stomach. If only she knew what I had discovered. If only she knew that in less than an hour, I would destroy the man she believed was going to be her son-in-law. Mark and I had met 2 years ago at a business networking event. He was in real estate development. I was looking to expand my design firm into commercial spaces. What started as a professional connection quickly became something deeper. He was attentive, ambitious, and seemed genuinely fascinated by my culture. He learned basic Samoan phrases, attended family gatherings, even commissioned a traditional pa tattoo design from me that he claimed he wanted to get after we married. "I want to be worthy of your family's acceptance," he'd told me one evening as we walked along the beach near my apartment. "Your grandmother's stories about protecting the Aga, I want to be part of that legacy." Those words had melted my heart. In Samoan culture, family isn't just blood, it's commitment, loyalty, protection. Mark seemed to understand that in a way no previous boyfriend ever had. When he proposed 6 months ago with my great-grandmother's ring that he'd somehow convinced my father to give him, I thought I had found my soulmate. We started a joint real estate venture, funded largely by the inheritance my grandmother had left me, nearly $800,000 that was meant to secure my family's future and fund the community cultural center she'd dreamed of building. Mark handled the business side while I managed the design and marketing. We were going to build something beautiful together, just like the marriage we were planning. The wedding itself was everything I'd dreamed of. Oceanfront ceremony, traditional Samoan elements woven throughout, and a guest list of 180 people that included everyone who mattered to me. Mark had insisted we spare no expense for our 150 guests. "This is our once-in-a-lifetime moment," he'd said. "Your grandmother's inheritance should help us start our marriage in style." I should have questioned why he was so eager to spend my family's money. I should have questioned a lot of things. But love, I learned, can make you blind to the most obvious red flags. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 months before the wedding. It was such a small thing that I almost dismissed it entirely. Mark had been taking more business trips lately, Seattle, Portland, sometimes Vancouver. Real estate was booming in the Pacific Northwest, he explained, and he was building relationships with potential investors for our company. I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? We lived together, shared everything, planned our future down to the smallest detail. But that Tuesday in March, I was on a video call with David Chen, a contractor we'd worked with on several projects. We were discussing timeline for a commercial renovation when he mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "I hope Mark enjoyed his downtime at the cabin in Oregon last week," David said casually. "He looked like he needed a break from the city." I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was racing. Oregon. Yeah, that beautiful place he showed me photos of, said it's been in his family for years. Lucky guy, having a retreat like that. The call ended normally, but I sat staring at my computer screen for 20 minutes afterward. Mark had told me he'd been in Seattle all week, meeting with investors. And what cabin? He'd told me his family had sold their old cabin property a year before we met. I specifically remembered him being sad about it, saying he wished he could have taken me there. When Mark came home that evening, I decided to ask about it directly. He was in a good mood, humming as he poured himself a glass of wine and started telling me about his successful meetings in Seattle. "David Chen mentioned something interesting today," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "He said you were at some cabin in Oregon." Mark's hand paused for just a fraction of a second before he laughed. "Oh, Dave's always getting his wires crossed. You know how he is, probably thinking of someone else. I was definitely in Seattle all week. Got the receipts to prove it." He kissed my forehead and changed the subject to wedding planning, but something felt off. Mark was usually so precise about details, so careful about his business dealings. Getting locations mixed up wasn't like him. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing other small things. He'd take phone calls on the balcony, speaking in hushed tones. When I asked who had called, it was always just business stuff, nothing important. His laptop, which had never had a password in the entire time we'd lived together, suddenly required one. When I mentioned it, he said his business partner had recommended better security practices. "Can't be too careful with client information," he'd explained, but he wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. The breaking point came 6 weeks before the wedding. I was reviewing our joint business accounts, preparing tax documents, when I noticed several large transfers I didn't recognize. Money from our primary account, money that came from my inheritance, money that was supposed to fund my grandmother's dream of a cultural center, was being moved to an account I'd never seen before. When I asked Mark about it, he had an explanation ready. "Investment opportunities," he said. "Short-term stuff that'll pay off big before the wedding. I wanted to surprise you with the returns." But he wouldn't show me the paperwork. He wouldn't give me the account details. And for the first time in our relationship, when I pressed him on it, he got angry. "Don't you trust me?" he'd snapped. "After everything we've built together, you're going to question my business decisions now." The guilt trip worked, but only temporarily. That night, lying in bed next to him, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out the truth. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who hired a private investigator to spy on her fiancé. Even as I sat in the sterile office of Blackstone Investigations, I kept thinking this was all a terrible mistake, that I'd laugh about my paranoia with Mark someday. The investigator, a calm, professional woman named Detective Sarah Martinez, listened to my concerns without judgment. She'd seen it all before, she told me. Business partners hiding assets, spouses living double lives, people who seemed perfect on the surface, but had secrets that ran deeper than anyone imagined. "What exactly do you want to know?" she asked. "Everything," I said. "Where he goes on these trips, what he's doing with our money, whether the man I'm about to marry is who he says he is." She quoted me a price that made me wince, but I paid it using my personal savings account, money I'd kept separate from our joint finances on my father's advice. If Mark was innocent, it would be the best money I ever spent on peace of mind. If he wasn't. The waiting was torture. For 2 weeks, I went through the motions of wedding planning while Detective Martinez and her team followed Mark's every move. I smiled at cake tastings, confirmed details with the florist, addressed invitations, all while feeling like I was living in a dream that might turn into a nightmare at any moment. Mark seemed oblivious to my internal turmoil. He was affectionate, excited about the wedding, full of plans for our honeymoon in Fiji. He even surprised me with a traditional Samoan wedding gift, a beautiful hand-carved kava bowl that he said he'd commissioned from an artist in American Samoa. "For our new home," he'd said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I admired the intricate patterns. A symbol of the family we're going to build together. I wanted so desperately for everything to be normal, for my suspicions to be unfounded paranoia. But the kava bowl felt heavy in my hands, weighted with something I couldn't name. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 6 weeks before our scheduled October wedding. Detective Martinez's voice was gentle but firm when she said, "Ms. Tomalolo, we need to meet. I have information you need to see." I met her at a coffee shop downtown, away from any place Mark might randomly appear. She slid a manila envelope across the table, and I noticed her hands were steady while mine were trembling. "I'm sorry," she said before I even opened it. "I wish I had better news." The first photograph showed Mark outside a beautiful log cabin nestled in the Oregon mountains. He was smiling, relaxed, wearing clothes I'd never seen before. The second showed him with his arms around a blonde woman who was obviously pregnant. The third showed him playing in a yard with two young boys who had his eyes, his smile. I stared at the photos for a long time, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This wasn't some business meeting. This wasn't some secret investment opportunity. This was a family, Mark's family. "Her name is Sarah Collins," Detective Martinez said quietly. "They've been married for 8 years. The boys are 7 and 5. She's due with their third child in about 6 weeks." I looked up from the photos, my voice barely a whisper. Married. Legally married? In Oregon. I have copies of the marriage certificate, birth certificates for the children, mortgage documents showing they own the cabin together. "Ms. Tomalolo, your fiancé is already married. He has been the entire time you've known him." The coffee shop seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to anchor myself to something real. "That's impossible. We live together. We're planning a wedding. We have a business together." "He's been living a double life," she said. 2 weeks a month with you in California, 2 weeks with them in Oregon. He tells you he's on business trips, tells them he's working on a major development project that requires extended time away. She slid more documents across the table. Bank statements showing the money from my inheritance being transferred to accounts in Sarah's name. Receipts for children's furniture, school tuition, medical bills. My grandmother's legacy, meant to secure my future and fund her dream cultural center, was being used to support his real family. "There's more," Detective Martinez said. "The business you think you're building together? The properties are all being purchased under shell companies that list Sarah as the primary beneficiary. If something happened to Mark, you'd have no legal claim to any of it. And there are indications he's done this before. We found traces of at least 2 other women he may have defrauded in similar schemes." I sat in that coffee shop for 2 hours, going through every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence that proved the man I loved was a stranger. Detective Martinez waited patiently, occasionally ordering me more coffee I couldn't drink, while I tried to process the magnitude of his betrayal. Finally, I looked up at her. "What are my options?" "Legally, you could walk away, consider yourself lucky you found out before the wedding. Or," she paused, studying my face, "you could fight back." Something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. What would fighting back look like? "Fraud charges. Civil suit for recovery of your inheritance plus damages. If you can prove he entered into the business partnership and your relationship under false pretenses, you might be able to recover everything and then some." I thought about my grandmother, about the stories she used to tell about protecting the Aga, about standing up to those who would harm your family. Mark hadn't just betrayed me, he'd stolen from my family's legacy, dishonored everything my grandmother had worked to build. "I want to fight," I said, "but I want to do it right." Detective Martinez smiled for the first time since I'd met her. "I was hoping you'd say that." The next 2 weeks were the most difficult of my life. Every morning, I woke up next to a man I now knew was a stranger. Every evening, I smiled and discussed wedding details with someone who was planning to commit bigamy. Every night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd been so completely fooled. But I wasn't just grieving, I was planning. Detective Martinez connected me with Rebecca Chen, a lawyer who specialized in fraud cases. Rebecca was brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely fascinated by the complexity of Mark's deception. "This isn't just bigamy," she explained during our first meeting. "This is wire fraud, identity theft, breach of fiduciary duty, and about 6 other felonies. The fact that he used your inheritance to support his other family while lying about your business partnership. We're looking at serious money." She laid out our strategy. First, we'd secure all the evidence, including financial records and witness statements. Then, we'd file both criminal charges and a civil suit, but the timing would be crucial. If you confront him privately, he might flee. Rebecca warned. Men like this often have exit strategies. We need to serve him when he can't run, when there are witnesses, when the humiliation is complete enough that he knows fighting back will only make things worse. That's when I made the decision that would define everything that followed. I want to serve him at the wedding. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. That's dramatic. Are you sure you want to put yourself through that? He's planning to commit bigamy in front of my entire family, I said. He's going to stand there and lie to a priest, to my parents, to everyone I love. If I'm going to destroy him, I want to do it in front of the same audience he was planning to deceive. We spent hours planning every detail. The wedding would proceed normally until the moment when the priest asked if anyone objected. That's when Sarah, Mark's real wife, would stand up and identify herself. Detective Martinez and her partner would be there, posing as ushers, ready to serve the legal papers the moment Mark's bigamy was exposed. What about Sarah? I asked. She's as much a victim as I am. I've reached out to her, Detective Martinez said. She's devastated, but she wants to help. She had no idea you existed until I contacted her. She thought Mark was working on some major development project that required him to be away half the time. I assured her we'd provide legal support and protection for her and the children. That seemed to convince her to participate. Rebecca handled the legal paperwork. The civil suit was for $1.5 million, the full amount of my inheritance plus punitive damages for fraud and emotional distress. The restraining order would prevent him from accessing any of our shared assets or contacting me once the truth came out. But perhaps the most important element was making sure Sarah and her children would be protected. Rebecca helped me set up a legal aid fund for Sarah, and we arranged for her to have her own lawyer present at the wedding. Whatever happened between Mark and me, I wasn't going to let his innocent family suffer. The hardest part was acting normal around Mark. He was so excited about the wedding, so full of plans for our future. He showed me pictures of the house he wanted to buy for us, a house I now knew would be purchased with my money and deeded to his real wife. He talked about the children we'd have someday, not mentioning that he already had children who called him daddy. But the worst moment came when I caught him wearing his ai lava, the traditional Samoan garment I'd given him, while talking dismissively on the phone about handling the California situation. When he saw me watching, he quickly changed his tone, but I'd heard enough. He was using my culture's sacred symbols while mocking our relationship behind my back. 3 days before the wedding, he surprised me with a gift, a traditional Samoan necklace made of shells and pearls. "For my beautiful bride," he said, fastening it around my neck. "I want you to wear this when you walk down the aisle. I want everyone to see how proud I am to be joining your family." I looked at myself in the mirror, wearing a necklace bought with stolen money by a man who was planning to make a mockery of everything my family held sacred. That's when I knew I was making the right choice. "It's beautiful," I told him. "I can't wait for everyone to see it." The night before the wedding, Mark held me close and whispered about how much he loved me, how excited he was to start our new life together. I listened to every word, memorizing them, knowing they would be the last lies he ever told me. "Tomorrow is going to be perfect," he said. "Yes," I agreed, "it really is." The morning of my wedding dawned clear and beautiful, with the kind of perfect California sunshine that makes everything look like a movie set. I woke up early in the bridal suite, my stomach churning with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. Today, I would either become Mrs. Mark Collins or I would destroy the man who had tried to steal my life. My mother, aunts, and cousins arrived at 7 a.m. with coffee, pastries, and enough nervous energy to power the entire resort. They chattered excitedly about the ceremony, the reception, how beautiful I was going to look. I smiled and nodded and tried not to think about how their excitement would turn to shock in just a few hours. "You seem nervous, sweetie," my mother said, brushing my hair with long, gentle strokes. "That's normal. I was terrified on my wedding day." "Just want everything to be perfect," I said, which was true, just not in the way she thought. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Martinez. "Everything is in place. Sarah arrived an hour ago with the children. She's nervous but ready. Are you sure about this?" I typed back, "Never been more sure of anything." The next few hours passed in a blur of hair, makeup, and dress fittings. My cousins laughed and took selfies while I was transformed into a bride. The traditional white hibiscus was placed carefully in my hair, loose and natural, just like my grandmother had worn. The shell and pearl necklace Mark had given me felt heavy around my neck, but I wore it anyway. Let him see his stolen money adorning his victim one last time. As my makeup artist worked on my face, I caught a glimpse of my dark brown eyes in the mirror. At 35, I had learned to read the stories written there: joy, sorrow, determination. Today, they held secrets that would soon reshape everything. At 11 a.m., Rebecca Chen arrived disguised as a wedding coordinator. She pulled me aside for a final briefing. "The papers are ready," she said quietly. "Detective Martinez and her partner are already in position. Sarah is in the back row with her children. She looks nervous but determined. The moment the priest asks for objections, she'll stand up and identify herself as Mark's wife. That's your cue to give the signal." What if Mark tries to run? He won't get far. We have security at all the exits, and besides, his whole family is here. Men like Mark don't run when their reputation is on the line, they try to talk their way out of it. At noon, my father knocked on the bridal suite door. "Ready, sweetheart." I looked at myself one final time in the mirror. White dress, traditional necklace, hibiscus in my hair, and eyes that held secrets no bride should have to carry. But I wasn't just a bride today. I was a warrior, fighting for my family's honor and my own future. "I'm ready, Dad." The walk to the ceremony site was surreal. 180 guests lined the path, smiling and waving, completely unaware that they were about to witness something far more dramatic than a simple wedding. The oceanfront venue, which had cost $30,000 of my inheritance money, now served as the stage for his exposure. I saw Mark waiting at the altar, handsome in his white shirt and the traditional ai lava lava I'd given him. He was smiling, relaxed, probably thinking about how perfectly he'd managed to deceive everyone. In the back rows, I spotted Detective Martinez and her partner, looking perfectly natural in their roles as ushers. And there, in the very last row, was a blonde woman holding a baby, with 2 young boys pressed close to her sides. Sarah, Mark's real wife. The woman whose life was about to be turned upside down along with mine. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw my own pain reflected in her face. She nodded slightly, a signal that she was ready to do what needed to be done. The music began, and my father offered me his arm. "You look beautiful," he said. "Your grandmother would be so proud." "I hope so," I said, and meant it more than he could possibly know. As we walked down the aisle, I could smell the ocean salt air mixing with the traditional Samoan flowers that decorated the altar. The scent should have been comforting, but it clashed with the tension building in my chest. I kept my eyes on Mark. He was beaming, probably already thinking about the honeymoon we'd never take, the house we'd never buy, the children we'd never have. He had no idea that his entire world was about to collapse. The ceremony began exactly as planned. The priest spoke about love, commitment, and the sacred bonds of marriage. Mark's responses were confident, his vows heartfelt. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed he meant every word. When it came time for my vows, I spoke about honesty, trust, and the importance of family. "A marriage built on lies," I said, looking directly into Mark's eyes, "is no marriage at all." He smiled, thinking I was speaking generally about the importance of truth in relationships. He had no idea I was speaking directly to him. The priest continued through the ceremony, and I felt my heart pounding harder with each passing moment. The sound of waves crashing against the shore below seemed to echo the rhythm of my pulse. Finally, we reached the crucial moment. If anyone present knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. I could hear my own heartbeat, the distant sound of waves, someone's nervous cough. Then, from the back of the crowd, a clear voice rang out. "I do." Every head in the congregation turned. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ocean waves crashing against the shore below. Sarah stood slowly, her baby in her arms, her 2 young boys clinging to her dress. Her voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I object to this marriage," she said, her words carrying clearly across the stunned crowd. "I'm his wife." The gasps that rippled through our guests sounded like a wave breaking. I watched Mark's face go through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then pure terror. The color drained from his skin so completely he looked like he might faint. His hands trembled as he dropped the wedding ring, which bounced off the altar and rolled into the sand with a soft thud. "That's impossible," someone whispered behind me. I think it was my cousin Maria. Mark's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. He looked from Sarah to me, his eyes wild with panic. Finally, he leaned close to me, his voice a desperate whisper that the front rows could clearly hear. "Leilani, I can explain. Please just let me explain." This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when all his lies, all his careful deceptions, all his stolen dreams would crumble around him. I looked into his terrified eyes, and for the first time in months, I felt completely calm. I reached up and slowly removed the white hibiscus flower from my hair, the symbol of pure love that had become something else entirely. I held it for a moment, then let it fall to the sand at my feet. I shook my head slowly and gave him a small, serene smile. "No need," I said, my voice clear and strong enough for everyone to hear. "You thought you could steal my AGA mark, but today I'm reclaiming it." That was the signal Detective Martinez had been waiting for. She and her partner stepped forward from their positions as ushers, no longer pretending to be part of the wedding party. The first investigator held a thick envelope, the second carried an official-looking folder. "Mark Collins," Detective Martinez said in a voice that cut through the chaos like a blade. "You're being served." Mark's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the papers they pressed into his palms. The first document was a restraining order, legally barring him from contacting me or accessing any of our shared assets. The second was much thicker. "This is a lawsuit for $1.5 million, I announced, my voice carrying across the silent crowd. "For fraud, emotional distress, and the recovery of the inheritance he stole from my family to fund his other life." The effect was immediate and devastating. Mark stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Some of our guests were on their feet, trying to get a better view of the drama unfolding. Others sat frozen in their chairs, mouths open in shock. I could hear smartphones clicking as people started recording, the sound of a moment going viral in real time. "Leilani," Mark said again, his voice breaking. "Please, we can work this out. I love you. I love you both, but you're already married," I finished for him. "You've been married for 8 years. You have 2 children, with a third on the way. You've been using my inheritance to support them while lying to me about business trips and investment opportunities." Sarah was making her way down the aisle now, her children following close behind. When she reached the altar, she looked at Mark with a mixture of heartbreak and disgust. 8 years, she said, her voice shaking. 8 years I believed you when you said you were working on some big development project. 8 years I raised our children alone half the time because I thought you were building a future for our family. Mark looked between us, his face crumpling. "I never meant for this to happen, it got complicated." "Complicated?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You committed fraud, bigamy, and theft. You stole from my family's legacy to support yours. You were planning to marry me today while you already had a wife and children. That's not complicated, Mark. That's criminal." Detective Martinez stepped forward again. "Mr. Collins, you should know that criminal charges are also being filed. Wire fraud, identity theft, and bigamy are felonies. You'll want to contact a lawyer." The crowd was buzzing now, voices rising as people tried to process what they were witnessing. I heard my father's voice, angry and protective. "Get him away from my daughter." I heard Mark's business partner, confused and worried. "What about our projects?" I heard my mother, heartbroken. "How could we not have known?" But through it all, I felt strangely peaceful. The man who had stolen my dreams, my money, and nearly my future was finally facing consequences. The lies that had poisoned our relationship for months were finally exposed. The truth, ugly as it was, had set me free. Mark was still trying to salvage something from the wreckage. "Leilani, please, I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We love each other." That was real, even if everything else was. "Everything else was lies," I said firmly. "Every business trip, every late night, every dollar you stole from my inheritance. Every time you told me you loved me while you were planning to betray me. None of it was real, Mark, and neither was this marriage going to be. I began removing the jewelry he had given me. The shell and pearl necklace came off first, purchased with my own stolen money. I handed it to Detective Martinez. Evidence, I said. Then I pulled off the engagement ring, my great-grandmother's ring that he had somehow convinced my father to give him. I placed it carefully in my father's hands. This belongs to our family, I said, not to thieves. Mark was crying now, ugly, desperate sobs that made some of the guests look away in embarrassment. Please, he begged, don't do this. Think about what we built together. We didn't build anything together, I said. You built lies. I built a business with my own money that you stole. You built a relationship with deception while you already had a family. The only thing we built together was this moment, this reckoning. Sarah stepped forward, her baby still in her arms. I want you to know, she said to me, I had no idea you existed. If I had known, I would have told you immediately. You didn't deserve this. Neither did you, I replied. Neither did your children. I turned to address our stunned guests. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I know this isn't the ceremony you expected to witness, but in a way, it's exactly what needed to happen. My grandmother always taught me that the truth will set you free, even when it hurts. Today, the truth has set us all free. Mark was being led away by Detective Martinez and her partner, still clutching the legal papers, still trying to protest his innocence. As he passed me, he made one last desperate attempt. This isn't over, he said. You can't prove everything you're claiming. I smiled at him one final time. Mark, I said, you have no idea what I can prove. The reception that followed was unlike any wedding celebration in history. What should have been a party became something between a wake and a victory celebration. The catering staff, bless them, continued serving food and drinks as if nothing unusual had happened. My family and friends, after the initial shock wore off, rallied around me with a fierce protectiveness that made my heart swell with gratitude. Within hours, videos of Mark's face going pale and the dramatic confrontation were spreading across social media platforms. Comments flooded in with messages of support for women's strength and calls for justice. The hashtag #AgaJustice began trending, with people sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. My father stood up during what would have been the toast portion of the evening and addressed the gathered crowd. Today, we witnessed something painful but necessary, he said, his voice strong and clear. We saw my daughter choose truth over comfort, justice over convenience. In our culture, we have a saying, "Olu ala ila pule ola tadua," the way to leadership is through service. Today, Leilani served the truth, even when it cost her everything she thought she wanted. The crowd erupted in applause. My mother, who had been crying on and off since the ceremony, stood up and hugged me tightly. I'm so proud of you, she whispered, and your grandmother would be too. Sarah and her children had been taken to a quiet suite where Rebecca Chen was explaining their legal options. I made sure they had everything they needed: food, childcare, legal representation. Whatever Mark had done to me, his family were victims too, and I wasn't going to let them suffer for his crimes. Detective Martinez found me during the reception, looking satisfied but tired. Well, she said, that was certainly memorable. How are you holding up? Better than I expected, I said honestly. I thought I'd feel devastated, but mostly I just feel free. The legal proceedings will take time, she warned. Mark will probably try to fight the charges, claim it was all a misunderstanding. Are you prepared for that? I have evidence, I said. Bank records, photographs, witness statements. Let him try to explain away 8 years of bigamy and fraud. Rebecca Chen joined us, looking pleased. The restraining order is in effect immediately, she reported. Mark can't contact you, can't access any of your shared accounts, and can't dispose of any assets until the court case is resolved. We've also frozen the accounts where your inheritance money was transferred. Over the following weeks, the true scope of Mark's deception became clear. He hadn't just been living a double life. He'd been running a complex financial fraud that involved multiple shell companies, fake business partnerships, and forged documents. My inheritance wasn't the only money he'd stolen. He defrauded at least 3 other women and 2 business partners over the past 5 years, just as Detective Martinez had suspected. The criminal case moved quickly. When faced with overwhelming evidence and the testimony of multiple victims, Mark's lawyer advised him to plead guilty to avoid a lengthy trial. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all his victims. The civil suit took longer but was ultimately successful. I recovered my full inheritance plus damages, totaling nearly $2 million. More importantly, I recovered my sense of self-worth and my faith in my own judgment. Sarah and I became unlikely friends. She divorced Mark while he was awaiting trial and moved closer to her family for support. I helped her find a good lawyer and made sure she got her fair share of the assets Mark had hidden. Her children, innocent victims of their father's crimes, deserved better than the chaos he'd left behind. 6 months after what would have been my wedding day, I was sitting in my office reviewing plans for a new design project when my assistant knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says she's a potential client, but she seems nervous." The woman who entered was young, maybe 25, with worried eyes and an engagement ring that looked suspiciously familiar. "Ms. Tomalolo," she said hesitantly, "my name is Jennifer Walsh. I think my fiancé might be lying to me about something important. I heard about what happened to you and I was wondering, could we talk?" I gestured for her to sit down, my heart aching for this young woman who was probably about to discover her own terrible truth. "Tell me everything," I said. As she began her story, a fiancé who traveled frequently for business, unexplained financial transactions, phone calls he took in private, I realized that Mark's arrest had been just the beginning. There were other victims out there, other women whose dreams were being stolen by men who thought they were too clever to be caught. That's when I knew what my new mission would be. I'd survived Mark's betrayal and come out stronger. Now it was time to help other women do the same. I started a nonprofit organization called Eliza Protection Services, named after my grandmother's teachings about protecting family. We help women investigate suspicious partners, provide legal resources for fraud victims, and offer support for those rebuilding their lives after betrayal. The viral attention from my wedding day helped us gain immediate recognition and funding. Detective Martinez became our head investigator. Rebecca Chen handles our legal cases pro bono. And Sarah, once she finished her nursing degree, joined us as a victim advocate. A year after my non-wedding, I was featured in a magazine article about women who turned personal tragedies into forces for good. The reporter asked me if I regretted not discovering Mark's deception earlier, before I'd invested so much time and money in our relationship. "I don't regret it," I said, and I meant it. That experience taught me that I'm stronger than I knew. It taught me that the truth, however painful, is always better than a beautiful lie. And it gave me a purpose I never would have found otherwise. The hibiscus flower I wore in my hair that day, the symbol of pure love that turned into a crown of justice, sits pressed in a frame in my office now. Not as a reminder of what I lost, but as a symbol of what I found. The strength to fight for the truth, the courage to protect others, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. My grandmother always said that when someone tries to destroy your ego, you don't just defend, you build something stronger. That's exactly what I did. Mark thought he was stealing my future, but he actually gave me a better one than I ever could have imagined. And every time I help another woman discover the truth about a deceptive partner, every time we recover stolen money or expose a fraud, I hear my grandmother's voice. "Olu ala ila pule ola tadwa." The way to leadership is through service. I may not have gotten the wedding I planned, but I got something much more valuable. A life dedicated to protecting others from the kind of betrayal I survived. And that, I've learned, is worth more than any marriage built on lies ever could have been. The truth really did set me free. And now, I spend my days helping it set others free too. The community cultural center my grandmother dreamed of, we built it with the recovered funds, and it now serves as headquarters for Eliza Protection Services, helping families across the country protect themselves from predators like Mark. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. It's building something so beautiful and meaningful from the ashes of betrayal that the person who tried to destroy you becomes nothing more than a footnote in your success story.
Leilani, thank you for your raw honesty. Your story shows that embracing cultural roots and truth can transform betrayal into a legacy of protection, inspiring us all to reclaim our power. It's a powerful reminder that justice rebuilds stronger communities. I'm Eliza Quinn, and remember, here on Wedding Day Justice, veils off, justice on.